You walk out to your tomato patch in the morning, coffee still warm in your hand, and you see it again. Green, big, tall, thick green plants taller than your fence, leaves like a jungle, and almost no tomatoes. Maybe two or three little hard ones hiding in all that foliage. Here is the truth nobody at the garden store will say out loud. That giant leafy plant is not a healthy plant, it is a confused one, and you fed it that way without knowing it. I was raised plain in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and we have grown tomatoes the same way for more than 100 years. No bloom boosters, no fancy bottles, and our plants hang so heavy with fruit the stakes bend. The outside world has been sold the opposite of what works because there is good money in selling you the wrong thing over and over. Stay with me because right around the middle of this, I'm going to show you how to force a stubborn plant to set fruit using something already sitting in your kitchen drawer for less than the price of a cup of coffee, the very same trick my grandfather used with a wooden stake on a hot July afternoon. Before we go further, do me one small favor. Drop your state or your growing zone down in the comments. Just type it in. It matters more than you think, and I will tell you exactly why later on. Now let me tell you what almost nobody understands about why your plant shows leaves over fruit. A tomato plant is not trying to feed you. Let us be honest about that from the start. A tomato plant is trying to survive and make seeds. Leaves and fruit are two different jobs, and the plant can only pour its energy into one direction at a time. When conditions feel easy and rich, the plant does what any living thing does when times are good. It grows big and comfortable. It builds leaves. It stretches tall. It puts off having babies because why rush when life is easy? Fruit is the plant's version of having babies. And here is the part the industry never explains. A tomato plant will only pour its strength into fruit when it feels a certain kind of pressure. Too comfortable and it just gets fat and green. That is the whole secret behind a leafy plant with no tomatoes. You made its life too easy, and you probably paid money to do it. Think about what happens in the wild before any of us were tending gardens. A tomato is a scrappy weed from the dry hills of South America. It grew in poor, rocky ground where water came and went. That plant learned over thousands of years that when things get a little tough, you had better make seeds fast while you still can. We took that tough little survivor and we planted it in rich soil and we drowned it in the one thing that tells it to relax and grow leaves. That one thing is nitrogen. Nitrogen is the letter that builds green. It is the engine behind every leaf and every stem. And nearly every product sold to the average homeowner with the word tomato on the label is loaded heavy with it. You see three numbers on a fertilizer bag. The first number, that first one, is nitrogen. Walk into any big store and pick up what they hand you for tomatoes, and I promise you that first number is high. They are selling you leaves. Beautiful, useless, leafy green leaves. My father used to say, a fat plant is a lazy plant. I did not understand him until I was grown, but he was right, and now the universities are saying the same thing in longer words. Here is where the science backs up what the plain folks always knew. Cornell and Penn State Extension research on tomatoes has shown for years that excess nitrogen delays flowering and reduces fruit set. Ohio State's extension put it plainly that too much nitrogen produces vigorous, dark green plants with few tomatoes. That is not folklore. That is the outside world's own scientists confirming what my grandfather knew by watching his plants. So the first thing you do this week, and it costs you nothing, is stop. Stop feeding your tomatoes that high nitrogen food. If your plant is already big and green and leafy, it does not need one more drop of nitrogen this whole season. You have fed it plenty. It is stuffed. Cut it off completely. But cutting off nitrogen is only half the story, and here is where it gets interesting. Because if the first number tells the plant to grow leaves, there are two other numbers that tell it to make flowers and fruit. And those are the ones the plant is usually starving for. That is what we turn to next, and it involves something free that most of you are throwing straight into the trash. Those other two numbers on the bag are phosphorus and potassium. Phosphorus, the middle number, helps the plant build roots and flowers. Potassium, the last number, that is the big one for fruit. Potassium is what moves sugar and water through the plant and fills the tomato out fat and firm and sweet. A plant short on potassium will flower and then drop those flowers or set a few sad little fruits that never plump up. Potassium is the difference between a hard green marble and a heavy red beefsteak. Now, the industry would love to sell you a special bottle of Bloom Booster for this 10, 15, $20 a bottle, and they will happily sell you a new one every summer for the rest of your life. But my people never bought a single bottle because we had all the potassium we needed sitting in the bottom of the wood stove. Wood ash, plain gray ash from burning hardwood. That is one of the richest, cheapest sources of potassium there is. And folks are dumping it in the trash or throwing it out on the ice in winter. Wood ash runs somewhere around 3 to 7% potassium, along with a good dose of calcium and trace minerals your plant is hungry for. My grandmother kept a metal bucket by the stove all winter long, and by spring we had a treasure most gardeners pay good money for. Here is exactly how you use it, because ash is strong and you can overdo it. You take a small handful, a level half cup at the very most, and you scatter it in a ring around the base of one tomato plant out where the leaves reach, not up against the stem. Then you scratch it lightly into the top of the soil with your fingers or a hand fork and water it in. Do this once, maybe twice in a season, no more. A little goes a long way, but hear me on this because it matters. Wood ash raises the sweetness of your soil, what the scientists call raising the pH. If your ground is already sweet, already what they call alkaline, go easy because too much ash swings it too far and locks up other nutrients. And this is exactly why I asked you to put your state in the comments. Folks out west with naturally sweet, chalky soil need far less ash than folks in the sour, acid soils of the east in the rainy northwest. Where you live changes the dose. Tell me your zone, and I can steer you right. If you have no wood stove, do not worry. There is another free source of potassium, and it is one you eat every single day. But before I give you that, I have to tell you about the mistake almost everybody makes. The one product they sell more of than any other for tomatoes that does almost nothing for the problem you actually have. I am talking about Epsom salt. Walk through any garden forum, any comment section, any old wives' circle, and somebody will swear you must dump Epsom salt on your tomatoes. The stores stack it high because it is cheap for them, and it sells like crazy. And here's the quiet truth the sellers will never tell you. Epsom salt is magnesium, and most garden soil already has plenty of magnesium. Unless your soil is truly short on it, that Epsom salt does nothing for your fruit at all. I'm not making that up to be contrary. Researchers at Washington State University looked hard at the Epsom salt claims and found that on soils with enough magnesium already, adding more did not increase yield. And in some cases, dumping on extra magnesium actually blocked the plant from taking up calcium, which can bring on blossom end rot, that ugly black sunken spot on the bottom of your tomatoes. So, folks are out there causing the very rot they are trying to prevent and paying for the privilege. Think on that for a minute. An entire aisle built on selling you a fix for a problem most of you never had. My people never bought a box of it, and our tomatoes came in just fine. That is the pattern you start to see once your eyes are open. The outside world got talked into 100 little purchases to replace what nature was giving away for free. So set the Epsom salt aside unless a real soil test tells you that you are short on magnesium. Banana peels. And more than that, the water you cook with. A banana peel is loaded with potassium, the same fruit-filling mineral we have been talking about. The old way, and still the best way, is not to bury a whole wet peel, which just sits there and molds and draws flies. Instead, you cut the peels into small pieces and let them dry, or you toss them right into your compost. Even better, and this is the trick from my kitchen drawer I promised you, is the water when you boil vegetables, when you steam your greens, when you cook down anything from the garden, that water pulls minerals out of the food. Do not pour it down the drain. Let it cool and pour it around your tomatoes. Potassium and a dozen other trace minerals straight to the roots for absolutely nothing. My grandmother never once threw out vegetable water in her life. It went in a jar on the counter and out to the garden by evening. She would have thought pouring it down the sink was pure foolishness, like burning good money in the stove. And she was right. People pay for mineral supplements in a bottle and pour the real thing down the drain 3 times a day. So now you have stopped the nitrogen, you have fed the potassium, and you understand why. But there is still a piece missing. And it is the piece that trips up folks with a big established garden. Because I can already hear some of you thinking, this is fine for someone starting fresh, but my plants are already 6 feet tall and going crazy. It is July or later. Is it too late for me? Let me speak to you directly now because it is not too late. And there is something you can do this very weekend. If you are standing there with a monster plant, all leaf and no fruit, and you feel like you have already lost the season, I want to lift that worry off you right now. You have not lost anything. That big leafy plant is actually a plant full of stored energy. It is a loaded spring. All you have to do is redirect it, and you can do that today with nothing but your 2 hands and maybe a pair of scissors. First, the suckers. In the crook where a branch meets the main stem, a tomato plant sends up a new little shoot. We call it a sucker because that is exactly what it does. It sucks energy that could be going into fruit, and it spends it on yet more leaves and stems. On an overgrown plant, these suckers are running wild. Pinch them out. Just grab the little shoot between your thumb and finger and snap it off while it is young and tender. On a big neglected plant, you may have a dozen. Take them. Every sucker you remove is energy the plant now has to spend on tomatoes instead. Second, and this is the part that feels wrong, but works, thin out some of those big lower leaves. On a jungle plant, the bottom leaves are shaded, they never see the sun, and they are just mouths to feed. Strip off the lowest leaves up to the first fruit cluster. This does 2 things at once. It stops the plant wasting food on freeloading leaves, and it opens up airflow down low so your plant stays healthy and dry and does not rot in the humidity. My father called this giving the plant its ankles. Bare the ankles, he said, and the fruit will come. Before I give you that everyday potassium source I promised, let me stop for one honest minute, because everything I am teaching you here is only part of a much bigger picture. You are standing there with a plant all leaf and no fruit, sorting out ash and banana peels, and which bottle on the store shelf is a waste of your good money. That is exactly the confusion that never lets up, and it is not just tomatoes. It is the weeds, the fire ants, the mosquitoes, the money leaking out of your pocket season after season. That is why the whole plain method was put down on paper. It gathers the same kind of knowing I am sharing today into a complete system. It shows you the systematic mistakes that make every fix temporary and how to handle your yard using household materials that are safe for kids, pets, and your patients. Here is a test you can run for free tonight. Walk out and check the first number on whatever fertilizer bag you already own. Then look at your leafy plant and see for yourself whether that high nitrogen number matches the useless green jungle in front of you. The sooner you have the whole system in hand, the sooner you stop the money leaking out this summer. Now let me give you that everyday potassium source I promised, and it truly is in most every kitchen in America. Third, and here is the real turn for a plant that is all foliage. You top it late in the season. Once your plant has set the flower clusters it is going to set, you cut off the very top growing tip of the main stem. That top tip is the plant's ambition. It is where the plant keeps saying, grow taller, grow taller. Cut it and the plant finally gives up on getting bigger and pours everything it has left into ripening the fruit it already made. Growers call this topping, and it is how you get green tomatoes to actually turn red before frost instead of hanging there hard and green until it is too cold. None of that costs a dime. No new plant, no fresh start, no special tool, just your hands this weekend on the plant you already have. An established, overgrown tomato plant is not a failure. It is a full pantry that just needs the doors open. But even after all of this, after you fix the feeding and prune it right, some of you are going to run into the most heartbreaking problem of all. And this is the one that has driven gardeners half mad for generations. Your plant makes flowers, beautiful yellow flowers, lots of them, and then the flowers just dry up and fall off, no fruit. This is the mystery I promised you at the start, and the answer is so simple and so hidden that when you hear it, you are going to be a little angry nobody told you sooner. Let me set it up because you have to understand the flower first. A tomato flower is not like an apple blossom that needs a bee to carry pollen from one flower to another. A tomato flower has everything it needs inside itself. The male part and the female part are together in one flower. In the language of the growers, the tomato is self-fertile. It can pollinate its own self. So in theory, every flower should become a tomato, but it does not, and here is why. The pollen inside a tomato flower is held up in little closed tubes, packed tight, and it does not just fall out on its own. It has to be shaken loose. The flower has to vibrate just so for the pollen to drop down out of those tubes and land where it needs to land to make a fruit. If that flower never gets shaken the right way, the pollen stays locked up, the flower goes unfertilized, and it withers and drops. All that hope gone because a little dust never got shaken free. Out in the wild and in a good open garden, the wind does this. Bumblebees do it even better, and this is a wonder of creation worth knowing. A bumblebee grabs onto a tomato flower and buzzes its flight muscles without flying, a hard, fast shudder, and that shaking blasts the pollen loose in a little cloud. The scientists have a name for it. They call it buzz pollination or sonication. Researchers have measured that a bumblebee buzzes that flower at a frequency of a few hundred cycles a second, right in the range that shakes the pollen free the best. The honeybee, for all its virtues, cannot do this. Only certain bees can buzz just right. So here's the trap so many of you were caught in without knowing it. Maybe your garden is sheltered from the wind by a fence or a wall. Maybe the wild bumblebees have thinned out in your area, and you have noticed fewer of them than there used to be. Maybe there is a stretch of dead, still muggy summer air. In all those cases, your flowers are opening and nobody is shaking them, and every one of them is dropping off unfertilized. You did everything right with the feeding and the pruning, and still no fruit, and it is not your fault. Your flowers are simply lonely for a good shake. Now, the greenhouse industry knows this perfectly well. In the big commercial glass houses where they grow tomatoes all winter, they either buy boxes of live bumblebees or they pay workers to go down the rows with electric vibrating wands, buzzing every flower cluster by hand. It is standard practice. It is how the tomatoes in the store got made in the dead of winter. They know pollen has to be shaken. They just never bothered to tell the rest of us because there is no product to sell a homeowner in it. But my people knew, and this is the finale I have been leading you to, the trick my grandfather did with a wooden stake, and it is so simple you will laugh. On a hot, dry afternoon, usually somewhere between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, when the air is warm and the pollen is at its driest and most ready to fall, my grandfather would walk down his tomato rows, and he would give each stake a sharp flick with his finger or a light tap with a stick, just enough to shake the whole plant. You could see it if you watch close, a tiny puff, the flowers trembling, the pollen shaking loose right when the plant was most ready to catch it. He did it every day or every other day all through the setting season. Tap, tap down the row. It took him 10 minutes and his plants set fruit when the neighbors' plants dropped their flowers. You do not even need a stake. If your plant is in a cage or tied up, just reach in and give the main stem a firm little flick, or gently thump the support or take hold of a flower cluster and shake it soft for a second. Midday, when it is warm and dry, every flower cluster, every day or two while the plant is flowering, that is the whole thing, free. No bottle, no box of bees, no wand. And if you want to do exactly what the greenhouse workers do, here's the trick from your kitchen drawer or your bathroom shelf, an electric toothbrush. Turn it on, touch the buzzing back of it, not the bristles, to the stem just behind an open flower cluster for 1 or 2 seconds. That buzz is right in the same range as the bumblebee's buzz. You will sometimes see the faint dust of pollen shake loose. Do that to each cluster on a still warm afternoon, and you will set fruit like you have never seen. An old electric toothbrush, the one you were about to throw away, doing the exact job the commercial growers pay wages for. I want you to sit with how quiet this knowledge is. There is no company on earth that makes money teaching you to flick your own tomato plants with your finger. There is no bottle to reorder, no bag to rebuy, no subscription. That is precisely why you never heard it. Not because it does not work, but because working for free is bad for business. The plain people kept doing it in their gardens the whole time the outside world forgot tapping the stakes on a July afternoon, while everybody else drove to the store for one more bottle that would not fix a thing. Let me pull it all together for you now. The whole path from a leafy green failure to a plant bent double with fruit because it is simpler than they ever let you believe. You stopped the nitrogen because you were feeding your plant to grow leaves and it obeyed. You feed potassium instead from the wood ash in your stove, or the banana peels and vegetable water from your kitchen, because potassium is what fills a fruit out heavy and sweet. You leave the Epsom salt on the shelf unless a real test says you need it, and you keep your money. You prune the suckers and bare the lower stem and top the plant late so all that stored energy goes to fruit instead of jungle. And then you shake the flowers midday with a finger or a stick or an old toothbrush so the locked up pollen finally falls and every yellow flower has its chance to become a tomato. Not one step of that requires a thing you cannot get today for $1 or for nothing at all. That is the part that ought to make you a little angry, and I understand if it does. Because somewhere along the way, the outside world got convinced that growing a tomato was complicated, that it took chemistry and bottles and expert products when the plain folks were doing it with stove ash and a wooden stake the whole time. There's one more thing I will leave you, a small observation from a lifetime of watching these plants, and it costs nothing but paying attention. A tomato plant tells you what it needs if you learn to read it. Dark, curling, thick green leaves and no flowers. That is too much nitrogen. Ease off. Purple tint on the underside of the leaves. That is a hunger for phosphorus, the middle number. Yellowing and brown scorching along the edges of the older lower leaves. That is often a cry for potassium, the fruit filler. That black sunken bottom on the fruit, that is calcium not moving right, usually from uneven watering. So, water steady and deep, not a splash here and a flood there. The plant is not silent. We just stop listening because a bottle is easier than paying attention. My grandfather could walk a row and read every plant like a letter from a friend. You can learn to do the same. It only takes a season of looking. Here is what I want you to carry away more than any single trick. What you got back today is not just tomatoes, it is the knowing. For years, folks have been made to feel that they cannot grow their own food without buying their way through it, that nature needs to be corrected with something from a store shelf. That is the thing that was quietly taken from you, the plain confidence that the ground in your own two hands and a little handed down wisdom are enough. My people never lost that, and now you have it back too. You are the kind of person who would rather do a thing right and simple than pay to have it done wrong and expensive. You would rather keep your money in your pocket and your knowledge in your head. That is not being cheap. That is being free. That is the whole heart of the plain way, using what the good Lord already put in front of you and not wasting it. And there is nothing old-fashioned about it. It is just smart, and the outside world is only now catching up. So, do this for me. Down in the comments, tell me your state or your growing zone the way I asked you at the start. It genuinely changes how much wood ash you should use and how your soil behaves, and when you tell me, I can point you the right direction, and so can your neighbors reading along. And while you are down there, tell me which problem you are fighting right now. Is it a big leafy plant with no fruit, or is it flowers that keep dropping off before they set? Just type it out. I read them and I answer what I can, and half the time somebody in your own region has already solved the very thing you are facing. If this way of doing things sits right with you, come along with us. This is a growing bunch of us who are done overpaying for what the old ways gave away for free. Folks recovering the plain practical knowledge that never should have been buried in the first place. Everyone who joins makes the whole table bigger. And next time I'm going to show you the one thing my grandfather did to his soil every fall after the plants came out that meant he almost never had to buy a thing come spring. It is a single afternoon of work in October that most folks skip entirely, and it is the quiet reason his garden outproduced everyone's for 40 years. It has to do with what you bury, not what you plant, and I will show you exactly how. Until then, go out and give your tomatoes a good shake. You will not believe what falls into your hands by the end of the summer. If this story changed the way you look at those weeds in your garden or the way you tend your tomatoes, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Plant the future. The next treasure will be open soon.